Welcome once again. So we're talking about agency conflicts, and we got to moral hazard. Moral hazard. So I was explaining that morals are basically ethics, character, values. So in situations where a director does not have a lot of shares in the company, shares are basically your stake in the company, right? Your vested interest in the company. In situations where a director, a manager does not have shares in the company, they will not really care as much about the company as someone who has shares in the company, right? And this is what Jensen and Mecklin discovered. Jensen and Mecklin suggested that a manager's incentive to obtain these benefits is higher when he has no shares or only a few shares. So managers are more inclined towards just receiving benefits like company car, company salary, company driver. They are more inclined when it comes to benefits if they have no shares or only a few shares in the company. Number two, effort level. Managers may work less harder than they would if they were the owners of the company. The effect of this lack of effort could be lower profits and a lower share price. So there are situations where managers will not work as hard. They will not work as hard. They will just be, basically just going through the company without working hard to achieve results. So this is very, very important to understand. Very, very important to understand. Managers may work less hard than they would if they were owners of the company. It makes sense, right? Because managers do not own the company. They are only running it on behalf of another. So they will sometimes work less harder, right? So the fundamental question a company needs to ask is, how do we get our managers to work harder and feel like they're a part of the company? The interest of middle managers and the interest of senior managers might well be different, especially if senior management are giving pay incentives to achieve higher profits, but the middle managers are not. There are sometimes in companies where senior management are given certain bonus or incentives that drives them to want to achieve higher profits for the company, but middle managers are not. Lower level managers are not. And in situations like that, lower level employees might not be driven to achieve a lot for the company. It's very, very important. Now let's move on to earnings retention. The remuneration of directors and senior managers is often related to the size of the company rather than its profits. This gives managers an incentive to grow the company and increase its sales turnover and assets rather than to increase the returns to company shareholders. Management are more likely to want to reinvest profits in order to make the company bigger rather than pay out profits as dividends. When this happens, companies might invest in capital investment projects where the expected profitability is quite small and the net present value might be negative. So there's also the problem of earnings retention, right? Remuneration of the directors. This is very, very key. Please get this. The remuneration of the directors and senior managers is often related to the size of the company rather than the profits. So managers will therefore have an incentive to grow the company, because if they grow the company, that's where their incentives lie. So this gives managers an incentive to grow the company and increase sales turnover and assets rather than to increase return to the company shareholders. So management will be more likely to reinvest the profits back into the company to make it grow bigger rather than pay out the profits as dividends. Shareholders would want to get some dividends for the money they've invested into the company. It's very, very crucial. So number one is what? moral hazard. Number 2, effort level. Number 3, earnings retention. Moral hazard, we talked about the fact that if a manager or if management do not own shares in the company, they will be more focused on their interest rather than the interest of the company. Effort level, because managers are not necessarily the owners of the company, they might tend towards not working harder for the company. Earnings retention. Management might be more interested in reinvesting the profits of the company back into the company for it to grow rather than just paying out dividends. Whereas shareholders might want a dividend payout because they've invested money into the company. Now let's move on to agency conflicts. We're still talking about agency conflicts. Let's talk about risk, what we call risk aversion. Risk aversion. Executive directors and senior managers usually earn most of their income from the company they work for. They are therefore interested in the stability of the company because this will protect their job and their future income. Right? This means that management might be risk averse. That makes sense, right? Because if I'm an executive director or a senior manager in a company, most of my income will come from that company. So the long-term stability of the company would benefit me because that's where I get my bread. That's where I get my money from. And so this would mean that management might be risk averse. They might be afraid of taking risk because if they might be afraid that if they take huge risk, it might affect the company and things might go bad and they will not be able to get income or their salary paid from the company. And so because they might be risk averse, they might not invest in high risk projects. In contrast, shareholders might want the company to take bigger risk because the higher the risk, the higher the return. The shareholder is thinking about return because they've invested money. You see, so whereas management or directors might be risk averse, shareholders might want the company to take bigger risk. Because shareholders themselves, they invest in a portfolio of different companies, and so since they are diversified in that sense, it matters less to them if an individual company takes risks. It's very, very crucial. The last point is on time horizon. Shareholders are concerned about the long-term financial prospects of their company. Shareholders are concerned about the long-term financial prospects of the company because the value of their shares depend on the expectations for the long-term future. In contrast, management might only be interested in the short term, whereas shareholders are interested in the long term because it affects the value of their share, because as part of the valuation of the share, what is built in is the expectation for the long-term future. So whereas shareholders are more interested in the long-term financial prospects of the company, management is interested in only the short term, their annual bonuses in the short term, etc. So let me read this. This is partly because they might receive annual bonuses based on short-term performance, and partly because they might not expect to be with the company for more than a few years. Managers might therefore have an incentive to increase accounting return on capital employed, whereas shareholders have greater interest in long-term value. So these are some of where the conflict exists, right? We mentioned moral hazard, we mentioned earnings retention, we mentioned effort level, we talked about risk aversion, as well as time horizon. Now let's talk about agency costs. Agency costs are basically the cost of having an agent to make decisions on behalf of the principal. So when we talk, how does this relate to corporate governance? it relates in the sense that agency costs are basically the costs that shareholders incur by having managers to run their company instead of they running it themselves. Any cost they incur to get managers to run their company for them. Agency costs do not exist when the owners and the managers are exactly the same individuals. Agency costs would only arise as soon as some of the shareholders are not the directors of the company. Very, very crucial. Now, the last point to note here is that agency costs are potentially very high in large companies, because in large companies, there's a separation between ownership and control. Shareholders are on one side and directors or managers are at one side. So these are some principles that you need to understand. They are very, very crucial to understanding corporate governance, and I'll plead with you to go through these videos as many times as you can in order to have a firm grasp of it. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so. Send this video to a friend, share this channel with a friend, hit the notification bell so that anytime we post a video, you'll be the first to get it. Thanks and have a good day. Bye-bye.